Alright, I just got the patch panel made for the cowl. Cut this out of the new one. Cut it about a 1/4 inch long all the way around. And I actually went into the hole. Instead of cutting around, through here and down to where I could weld through here and not get into this hole, I decided to go ahead and just cut into the hole. That way I could save about 2 inches of the weld bead. Since I'm going to come down here with a bead anyway and all the way over here, it'll save that distance there from not having to weld it. And that's just extra heat that would maybe cause this to warp. So I just got it lined back up with the hole here. And slowly trimmed it out till I got it to fit, flush along the glass channel here, and the whole curvature of the corner there in the hole is lined up. And I guess I've got to still do 2 holes for the spot welds. I'll just punch those out, get this thing prepped, and I'll weld it in. And the back side I'll treat with Por-15, since there's a little bit of rust, surface rust right in here. I couldn't cut that completely out, or I would have gone into this panel. But it's just right on the surface. It's not anything to worry about. And I'll coat the whole backside with that with Por-15. Normally I would epoxy it, but since I've got to seal off that surface rust right in here, I'll just do Por-15. There's one spot here I'm going to sandblast. If I go through that, I'll probably put my copper weld backer behind it and just weld it up. There's no reason to cut this out. It'll be a lot less invasive that way if I need to, but I got to blast that out first. And then this thing will be done as far as rust repair on the cowl and the roof. I've got a spot over there on this quarter. I think I told you already about this. I've got to put a patch right there. Decided to save what's there and clean it up, get the rust out, and then just put a patch in the corner. Since we can't get that piece down there, we'll just do that. After that, I'll be able to paint the back half of the car up to here and all into the jambs. Doors will be off. Then I'll come back and paint from here, front half of the roof, all the way down across the cowl, and the fenders will be here because they seal to this, so they'll have to be on. Doors and hood, trunk will be painted separately. And then I'll hang all that back on and then do all the bumpers and the rocker panels under here. Okay, I just got this patch welded in. I went ahead and tacked it in several places along the edges just to keep it aligned, and then I came back and completely filled in the joints, and then I did these 2 plug welds at the very end that go onto the pinch weld. I'll have to trim this edge right here. This flange was a little bit longer than the original. Trim that down, flatten all the welds out. I'm going to go over here and sandblast this spot here. While I have the welder out, in case I blast through that, I can tack the holes. Before I put the welder up, I'm going to go ahead and do that. And while I have the blaster out, I'll come down in here and clean this out. Where I can't get the file belt down in here, I may need some blasting down in there, but the rest of it I think I can get with the grinders. Okay, we're all welded in, ground down smooth. Got it feathered out to epoxy prime all this first. Then I'll do body work on top of that. That way I can go ahead and get it sealed off. I'm also going to take some of that epoxy and go back behind here. What I did was I went back here with a Scotch-Brite, cleaned all the soot off of there as much as I can. I'm going to go in with a microfiber with some wax and grease remover to get the rest of this dust and dirt out. And just dauber on some epoxy under there, and then come back and spray this so that it's nice and even. I'll give it 2 coats so I've got something to sand in here, and I'll put body filler over the 2 seams. And then I'll actually put filler primer over this when I go around the car. I found some chips, like right here, and then like rock chips and all. There's one right there. Got to sand through. I'll go back and spot prime all this later with high build, but this right here will get sealed off now that all this is done. I did have to weld that spot right there. Did the same thing on the back, cleaned it up. You go here and wipe it out. Just get epoxy under there and then take the rest and spray it. Alright, I'm getting ready to weld in this little tab that I'm going to add on. This piece in the trunk would have come down all the way down to this level here where I had to cut it back. So I'm adding about 1.5 inch piece here. It doesn't run all the way across because a quarter panel wraps under to this edge of the wheelhouse. So I've got a little bit of a gap here. Once I get this flange replaced, I can put in this patch here that I made. Took this out of an old quarter panel I replaced earlier this year. Formed this to fit in this corner. So there's 2 drop down flanges that'll be plug welded, along here and here. And it fills in this entire section in one piece. And all this will get seam sealed front and back when it's all in epoxy and body worked. Okay, I've got all the patches done. I went ahead and epoxied the inside of the trunk floor a couple days ago. That way I wouldn't have to have so much open metal at once. I prepped this and epoxied it, and that way this wasn't sitting open the whole time I was stripping that. I came back and stripped all this back, sandblasted the weld just to make sure I got everything around the welds that I didn't go all the way through. I didn't want to grind all of it off. That way down beside the weld is blasted. Everything's roughed up. Went ahead and epoxied all this so that I can come back and scuff it, and I can body work all of this area right here just to smooth it out a little bit. And I left the bracket off because it'll be in the way of me smoothing all of this behind it. I could do from here back, but the bracket would be in the way of filling that joint back there. So what I'll do is I'll come back and weld this. There's 4 here, I believe 3 or 4 there, and a couple under here at the bottom. And I'll just inject some epoxy behind here in these joints, because none of this will burn off any of the body filler that I'll put on. I'm a good 3 or 4 inches away here, and same thing here, so I can weld this on after I've body filled all of this. Won't be any issues with burning it off. And once I epoxy that, I can come back where it's going to burn the paint off in here and spray a little epoxy, or just dab it in here just to coat it. Then I can paint the whole inside here, and I'll paint the outside with the quarter. Alright, I forgot to mention I have one other spot over here that's rotted, right here where this bottom screw goes into a speed nut for the rocker panel trim. The other side's fine, and up to right here is okay, but I cut both layers out because it had rotted in here and just jacked it out. This right here where the hole was, I measured from this hole to the existing hole here, and I also had the other side to go by too, but it was 65 millimeters from this hole to this hole, center to center. So I know where to put it back. And I've bent this lip down here, and I cut a little bit more of the outer piece off so I can grind that down and overlap here. That way I can get to the weld on the inner piece and grind it. If I welded it all the way in, then I'm trying to grind in a corner and add a piece over, so I wouldn't be able to do that too easily. There's a little bit of rust back here. I blasted all this before I put the patch in, and I just welded right along that corner. I cut it right along the fold where the 90 bend was. I'm going to hit this with weld through primer and the back side of the other piece, so when they mate together here, they'll have something between there. Once I get all this together and painted, I'll cavity wax inside the wheel well in the car and let that just wick down through here. But now that I've got this on, I'm going to take this edge that I folded out a little bit, and I'm going to flatten this back out and make a patch that will go over this. It'll be basically the same patch, just a little longer in this direction, and weld it along this corner and up here just like this one. And then I'll drill a hole through the middle. What I'll probably do is put a plug weld maybe on this end. It'll be welded here to this piece, and there'll be a hole, and then I can have a plug weld here. I may put a plug weld right in here somewhere just to have a little bit of a weld here holding some pressure off the joint. Take some of the load off this butt weld here, but At most 2 plug welds, and I'll mark where the hole is first so I know where that's got to be. Okay, you've got weld through primer on this piece. Got that lip rolled back flat, so this curve is back right up against the inner piece, and it's flat this direction. This is the patch panel. I've got to put one more coat of weld through on it. So this piece will go, the two with the weld through will go together. The circle there is where the hole will be. When I get all this done, I'll drill a hole through it before I paint it, and that way I can get some paint in the hole, or before I prime it. That'll weld in here, and then I'll plug weld through those 2 punched holes I put in. That'll lock this piece in place and stiffen this. This is not super stiff yet. That'll make this twice as thick and stiffen that up for that mounting point. And this is slightly taller than this piece, so when I go behind it, I've got to step in the pieces where I can put seam sealer along this edge, and you're not trying to seam seal right along the top. You've got a shorter piece here, and this will be taller, so I can force the seam sealer into that step and actually seal that joint. And then I'll come back and cavity wax everything inside after I get everything sealed off, so I can't get cavity wax oozing back out when I paint the car. It'll be sealed off. Okay, we're all rebuilt now. All new metal. Still just need to drill a hole in it right in here between the 2 spot welds or plug welds. I'll try to get you a shot behind here to show you what I was talking about stepping it out. This piece, see, that piece is, the outer piece is taller than the inner piece, so that gives me a step, so I can force seam sealer down in that step, and I don't have to worry about trying to get it right along the edge between the 2 panels. I can wipe the seam sealer like this into the step right there. You get a better seal. Now I've got to go back here and clean all this. I'm going to get epoxy, and I'm going to use it on a dauber. It's really hard to spray this direction, especially in the wheel well, and I definitely can't spray back here, so I'm going to get a dauber and just daub on. Just spread it out with a dauber. 2 coats. And I'll put some out here, and I'll spray what I can after that, but I got to make sure I get it coated back in here. I'm going to drill this hole first so I can get some in the hole. And then apply it with a dauber and spray everything else that I can on top of that. Give it a nice seal coat of epoxy. All right, everything's done. Just need to spray another coat of epoxy over everything that's exposed now. I won't go all the way underneath because I'm just going to scuff this, seam seal it, and undercoat that under there after I paint over what's there. But out here I'm going to put some more epoxy, especially over this bare metal here. I'm just going to coat all of this again, spray behind this bracket, spray around it. I don't need any up here really, but I've got some spots back here on the tail panel that were hit from the inside, so the paint was cracked and there were some spots of rust there. And the tow hook, that's visible, so I've got to hit that and paint it when I paint the outer body. May put a little primer over this just to give me something to sand, but I think if I put 2 coats of this new epoxy I use, it'll be enough to sand it without going through it. Got to get it masked off and then mask off this label. I'm going to save this and get some epoxy on this thing. All right, heating this up to cure it, but I've got 2 coats on all this down to this seam here. Once all this is cured, I'll come through and re-scuff it to get ready to paint it, and then I'll put all the seam sealer in once it's scuffed right before I paint. All I got left is to pull this off, but I could leave that till I paint it. No big deal. But I've still got to block out the quarters and then get the sunroof out. But I can paint the back half of the car at this joint all the way back, quarters and jambs, with the doors off without having the sunroof out. But that'll be part of the front half of the car, which I'll paint this out of the car, but I'll wait and do it with this and that'll be with the fenders on, since they have to be seam sealed to the body right in here. Then the doors, hood, and all the rest of the trim. All right, I've got rocker guard underneath, all the way to the back edge of the trunk pan. And I wrapped it around inside where it's going to get impacted. So that's actually going to cushion the new metal and the seam sealer that I applied to all this. I'll come back and undercoat all this black once I get the paint wrapped in about halfway under. When I paint the car, I won't go all the way in with the paint, but just enough to overlap this, and then I'll come back and undercoat to this bottom edge here and inside the wheel well, so all this will be black. Right now it's protected and actually finished, but it's not the right color, so I'll make it all black later. Okay, this should be the last of the repairs to the back of the car, where I can go ahead and start getting ready to paint it. Both of these license plate cutouts, well, for the lights, had rust around the rim of the hole, and it had kind of crept down probably a ½ inch. I had to blast that away. And there was some rust on here on the outside when it had just sanded through that. And there was another spot here where some rust had started under the paint. You can see that. Blasted that spot. And just some chips here and there. So I'm going to go ahead and epoxy all of the bare metal here and put a little primer over these areas in here and up along the top edge, since that'll be visible. This right here will be behind the license plate, so that doesn't really need primer, just epoxy. And once that's done, I think we'll be ready to block everything out, paint the back half of the car. All right, I've got this whole area down here that was repaired in epoxy, and I'll just scuff all that when I get ready to paint the outside. I'm prepping right now for paint for the back half of the car. This is all blocked out where you can see this lighter area. This is all blocked out with 180 on a linear block. All the way down the open areas and the bottom down there. I haven't done this right in here. I need to do that next. And I just reapplied the guide coat over that, so now I can just take the 180 out with 400 on a wet Durablock. That'll just get the 180 out of it, and then I'll just prep everything else with straight 400 to get the texture off of it, where I don't really need to block. I've done that over here. I've gone through after I reapplied the guide coat with the 180 grit scratches. And now I'm almost finished blocking those out. You can see all the 180 that's still in it. I've taken most of it out in here, but right in here is what it looks like when you first start. So I'll just block this on out with 400 until I get rid of all those straight line scratches, and then I'll know all the 180s out of it, and it'll be ready to go. I'm going to go all the way into the jams and remove all of these labels and replace these with reproductions. So I'll go all the way in up here and up to this molding flange here. That way I can paint the jam and then cover up my edge with the molding, and then I'll paint the outside after I get the back half done. It's not quite ready yet. This goes pretty quick once I've got it blocked out with 180, and I'm just basically sanding off the guide coat to get the scratches out. It's a lot faster to block this way. The initial block takes a little longer, but with 180 it cuts it quick, so it cuts down on the blocking time. If you start with 400, you'll be there forever. So this will get all painted all the way underneath. Had a few spots under here I had to treat, get some rust off, and places where something had hit the inside of the trunk and punched it outward. But I'll get everything back here painted all the way up to this seam, and I'll leave the roof and the cowl and fenders for the next session where I get all that done. Then I can pull the hood back off once the fenders are on, because I have to have it to align those. So hood and doors most likely we done together, and sunroof panel, maybe the trunk lid all at once. Then I'll be left with just the trim pieces.